Hey guys, what's up? I'm Erin and welcome back to the channel. If you had $1.5 million saved up for retirement, how long would it last? Well, the answer just might depend on where you live. In some states, that might fund a retirement for over 50 years. In others, you could run out of money in just 17 years. Well, that is according to GOBankingRates, who recently analyzed just how far $1.5 million as a retirement portfolio would take you across all different 50 states. Their assumption was that it's just a single individual living off Social Security and withdraws from their investments. But here's the problem. Their approach was deeply flawed. They assumed that a retiree would simply be spending down their money without ever investing it. And that's not really how retirement planning works. So let's go beyond the surface numbers and break down what this data actually means and show how investing changes everything. Because even if you capture just a modest return, your money could last far longer than all of the reported data here. When you start looking at the list, you see some really encouraging things. Based off the lowest cost of living states, think West Virginia, Kansas, Mississippi, Oklahoma, and Alabama. These are considered the 5 lowest cost of living states. And as no surprise, your $1.5 million could be able to sustain you the longest here. In these states, you could fund a 50-year or longer retirement. Now that's pretty incredible, right? If you've been a diligent saver, you save up this portfolio, you could do an early retirement to one of these states and basically ride it out for several decades. In fact, when you look at the typical withdrawal needed to fund the average cost of living in these respective states, you see that the draw on the portfolio after Social Security comes out to be just about 2% of the $1.5 million portfolio's value. That's pretty noteworthy. That is an incredibly safe rate of withdrawal, and if it is something that you follow, it pretty much ensures that your portfolio would last indefinitely. On the opposite side of the spectrum, we have the most expensive states: Alaska, New York, California, Massachusetts, and Hawaii. In these states, a $1.5 million portfolio is said to be able to sustain 20 or maybe a 30-year retirement, unless it's Hawaii, which is said to only be able to withstand a 17-year retirement. And let's hone in on the cost of living and what would be needed from the $1.5 million portfolio, because it's only once we get to California that we actually start to hit a 4% rate of withdrawal. For 47 of the 50 states, based on the information presented here, for one individual who's also drawing Social Security and then using a $1.5 million investment portfolio to cover the average cost of living, we're well under the 4% rule when it comes to a withdrawal rate. It's only once we get to the most expensive states, California, Massachusetts, and Hawaii, that we start to hit or surpass a 4% rate of withdrawal. Even the most expensive state, Hawaii, is at a 5.9% rate of withdrawal. Sure, that's higher than what's commonly recommended, but it's not obnoxiously high. It's not a number that we can't work with. So the big takeaway here is if you've built up an investment portfolio that is $1.5 million, you've set yourself up for a solid and comfortable retirement in pretty much any state you want to live in. And you really don't have to risk that you're going to run out of money. What really stood out to me is how they calculated these numbers. In the lowest cost of living states, this portfolio is said to be able to last about 50 years or so. In the most expensive states, it would last half as long, about 23 or 24 years, except for Hawaii, where they say it would be depleted within just 17 years. So how did they get these numbers? Well, it was pretty simple. They took the average cost of living in the respective state, subtracted a year's worth of Social Security benefit, and then simply estimated how long this $1.5 million portfolio would cover those expenses. For example, if your post-Social Security expenses were $50,000 a year, they'd estimate that your portfolio would last 30 years. It's pretty straightforward, but is that actually the best way to determine how long your money might last in retirement? Not quite. It's a fun way to compare the different costs of living between two states, but it doesn't reflect how retirees actually manage their money. In reality, this $1.5 million wouldn't just be sitting in the closet. Rather, a retiree would have it invested, earning some type of return. And rather than just spending it down, they would likely follow some sort of withdrawal strategy to ensure that it would last throughout the course of their entire retirement. So rather than assuming that this money is just sitting idly by, not earning any interest, let's assume that our retiree has this $1.5 million invested and that they're able to capture a conservative rate of return of 5%. Well, the lowest cost of living state was West Virginia, and we needed to pull just under $28,000 each year from our $1.5 million portfolio. Assuming this is our withdrawal each and every year and a 5% rate of return on the money that remains invested, in 30 years' time, this portfolio could grow to over $4.5 million. And let's do the opposite end of the spectrum, the highest cost of living state, Hawaii, where we would need to pull nearly $88,000 a year from our investments. If we assume this annual withdrawal and an annual rate of return of 5% on the money that remains invested, in 30 years' time, this portfolio would be closer to $650,000. Now, this portfolio is noticeably smaller, and that's because withdrawals are exceeding the growth rate, but even with higher levels of spending, we still have a fairly substantial portfolio after 30 years' time. Now, of course, real-world results would depend on market performance and how this money is invested as well as other factors. But let's be honest, no retiree with $1.5 million just has it sitting in cash, earning absolutely nothing. I mean, they could, but it's probably unlikely. It's not the best strategy, and it's not one that the typical retiree would follow. This is why investing matters, no matter where you are in your financial journey. Whether you're just starting out, whether you're mid-career, whether you're already retired, you have to keep your money invested to ensure that it continues to grow over time. Because the goal is simple, to make your money last as long as possible. And in order to do that, it has to stay invested. Once you have a solid investment plan, the next step is determining a safe withdrawal strategy. And contrary to popular belief, there is no one right magic number that you have to stick to year in and year out. And the fact of the matter is, if you choose a conservative number, something like 2% or 3% as your rate of withdrawal, it's very likely that your portfolio will last indefinitely and simply continue to grow over time. On the other hand, if you want a higher withdrawal rate, maybe 6 or 7%, that could still work. It just may require strategic planning. Maybe you have years where you allow yourself a higher rate of withdrawal, and then you have other years where you allow yourself a lower rate of withdrawal. You have a more dynamic and flexible approach. You have an approach that lives and breathes just like your portfolio. And it's having this kind of adaptability that makes these higher withdrawals actually possible throughout your retirement years. At the end of the day, it's about having a plan that fits your lifestyle and ensures that your money is working for you. And while this article does highlight that different states have different costs of living, for example, maybe you choose a state that doesn't have an income tax, but you want to be wary of what their property taxes look like because maybe those end up being higher. You also want to consider what your medical costs might look like throughout the course of your entire retirement, and they very well could be different in different regions of the country. You also want to consider your lifestyle and what you do for enjoyment, because at the end of the day, it really matters that you like where you live and that you have the opportunities to do what's important to you, not just that you choose the cheapest place to live. So while this article may be fun, it is certainly not how any retiree should go about planning their retirement. Investing your money matters. And I think one thing's for sure, if you have $1.5 million in investable assets, I think you're setting yourself up for a very comfortable retirement no matter where you live. And rather than asking the simple question of, how long will this money last? Why don't you ask a more detailed question? Like, how can I create a strategic plan that makes this money last as long as the retirement I want? What are your thoughts on having a $1.5 million invested portfolio? Share them in a comment down below. I post new videos every single week. If you got anything at all out of this one, please give it a like. If you're new here, please consider subscribing, or if you know of someone who might get something out of this type of content, please consider sharing. I'll see you soon. Bye. So let's that sun needs to go back behind a cloud. so I can have consistent lighting. Than what this report suggests. I didn't like it. Also drawing Social Security and then using the, so close. Now, of course, real world that's a real world results. Now, of course, actual real world, say that 4 times fast. Real world results. We're gonna get through it. I don't have to say it 5 times, just gotta say it once. And that's hard enough. No retiree has $1 million that they're keeping. 1.5 million. Even after I got the real world results. Okay, there is no one. And